Well, hello, it's David Roach again, back to make your life happier than it ever was. And today I want to talk to you about a continuation of the theme we had last week, which was what would happen? What would we all fight for if the US midterm elections took away democracy? There would be nothing left to really fight for. But fortunately, that didn't happen, though I think the question marks remain. But this week, we're going to turn to another corner of the warring, tripart, disorderly world we now inhabit and look at Russia. Now, Russia has at its head one of the most hopeless strategists that people have ever seen. His war, which he initiated, genocidal and evil, is a complete mess, and he's losing it. His military measures, his tactics on the battlefield of bombing children and civilian targets and civilian infrastructure have never won a war yet, and they're not going to win this one. In fact, they like the time of the Blitz in London. They reinforce the will of the people, the pride of the people, in many ways the joys of the people, and means he will lose. The third way he lost was he decided that his economic weaponry was going to be gas, and that he would reduce the Europeans to their knees, shivering. And the Ukrainians, of course, reduced them into lumps of ice by the middle of winter. And he was wrong. In effect, just to quote one figure, Russia now supplies 7% of Europe's gas, which you can turn off tomorrow morning without making a damn of difference. It used to be in the mid-40s, and that's only going back to 2020. So Russia, Vladimir Putin, all on his own, was the one who decided he would embargo gas. It wasn't us embargoing his gas, it was him embargoing his own gas. And where did he get? Nowhere. Okay, now what I actually want to do this week is to look at Putin's next escalation. Now, one of the things we have learned in recent weeks and months is that Putin escalates when he loses in various ways. He escalated against Ukraine in terms of bombardment of civil infrastructure and ordinary people. He escalated against Europe by cutting off gas. And what I believe his next step will be, no, it is not nuclear escalation. And it is not an electromagnetic bomb burst, electric blast from a nuclear detonation, because that is a nuclear detonation. And Putin is not a fool, and he is not mad. He is evil, but he is a loser. And he knows one thing for sure. He starts a nuclear game, he's going to lose it with his life. So what is it going to be? And the answer is, it's going to be a strange thing, tankers and oil. The Europeans still today buy about 37% of the oil output from Russia. Now that comes in terms of products, and it comes in terms of crude oil. And for the sake of a short video, not wishing to confuse everybody, including myself, I will just keep it as products. Now, Europe has cut that oil production significantly, but it is still 37%, which means that the Europeans, between now and the end of the year, have to find another home, another place that will supply them with 1,300 million barrels a day of crude and product. Let me set the scenario very simply. First, we will take a lesson, boring as I may be, in what embargoing oil actually means. If the Europeans do not get any more oil from Russia, because Russia says we shall not ship to you, and we'll come to the reasons why that will be in a minute, then the Europeans have to buy the oil someplace else. If the Russians ship that oil by the back door, it still enters world markets, and nothing as regards supply and demand has actually changed. So theoretically, by the additional shipping costs and the bother, the oil price doesn't change. But that is not what is going to happen. What is going to happen is that there will be no more oil shipments by ship to Europe. And that a great deal of oil, about 500 million barrels a day, that currently go by a pipeline to places like Germany, this is called the Druzhba pipeline, will be cut. Hungary and some other places will continue to have a dispensation, be allowed to get oil from that pipeline, but in the main, 500 billion out of 800 billion will be cut. And you want to add that to the oil that can no longer be delivered to its usual market, Europe. Now, it doesn't stop there, because that oil can be sold by Russia, but it has to be sold under a price cap, which has not yet been announced. And I will come to that in a second. But the oil has to leave Russia, if it is to be legal, under two conditions. One, it is being sold under the price cap. And second of all, it is being insured on ships by the International Group of P&I Clubs, which are an association of European insurers based in London, which cover 90% of the world's oil tankers. If a ship ships oil which is not covered in this way, let's say to Venezuela, it is in the dark shipping area, and it is declared illegal for the life of the ship. In other words, the ship cannot do one cargo illegally and then climb back into the fold. It's out forever. Now, the ship has to carry the oil and see that the oil is sold and fulfill the paperwork that the oil is sold under the price cap. What is the price cap going to be? Well, I'm going to give you an example, but I'm going to start by saying we don't actually know what the price cap is going to be yet, but we will know probably this week or early next week. Let us say that the price of oil is 90, and I'm taking a rough average for Brent here. Russia is already selling its oil abroad at approximately $10 below that price. People used to think it was $30 or $40, but apparently it is not. It is about $10. So Russia now gets 70. The price cap would be 60, let us say. So Russia would get $10 less, now getting 60. The price of extraction in Russia is 40 plus US dollars per barrel, which means that instead of getting 50 less transport on the $90 of oil, Russia would now be getting 60 less 40 something on each dollar of oil. So 20 bucks, call it a bit less than 20 bucks, which is a big cut. Now, it's not a war cut that is going to finish the war. And it's not a war cut that will bring Russia to its withered knees. But it is a cut which will do serious economic damage. And above all, it will do political damage because it is a substantial loss of prestige. But there is a problem. And the problem is this. In fact, there are two problems. The first problem is Europe. If Russia does not ship this oil at all, because it can't, and we'll come to that in a minute, then Europe is left scrambling for approximately 2.5 million barrels a day of oil, including the effects of the pipeline Druzhba, which we have seen cut. And that will come out of an oil market globally, where Russian supply will have dropped by the same amount. That means that the price of oil would go up to at least $120. And the result of that would be the reversal of all the happy hypotheses that have been made about falling inflation and Goldilocks scenarios in recent weeks, particularly as at the same time, on the 19th of November, we will see the negotiation or non-negotiation of the safe transit of wheats and grains through the Black Sea by Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey. So there's a lot pending. Then we come to the final trouble, the final thing that may not work. Theoretically, if Russia is now getting, let's call it $20 a barrel instead of $50 a barrel for its oil, it should still pump. Why? Because 20 is better than nothing. And Putin does need money. He needs it not only to run his economy, but to run his own kleptocratic, mogul-dominated economy, which relies on money under the table to keep the loyal loyal. But my best guess, and hopefully I'm not going to spoil your Christmas, is that Putin will not be able or willing to ship the oil. And the increase in the oil price will occur. Now, why will Putin not be able or willing to ship the oil? Let's take the willing part first. This would be a tremendous loss of face for Putin to comply with Western conditions of his enemies as regards the disposition of a major strategic asset. Not complying and cutting oil supply by approximately 20% would be painful, but it would show cojones. It would show that the little man still has balls and that he intends to escalate, not de-escalate. And if anyone wants to negotiate with him, they will have to negotiate with him as he uses all the weapons he sees likely to win the war, and which aren't. But he would see oil as a way of bringing the allies to their knees, and by splitting their solidarity on the whole Russian question. So it is much more likely he will escalate using oil than de-escalate and move towards what are going to have to be, if we are to win the war, and when we must, humiliating conditions for peace. So there are the reasons why I think he is going to be unprepared. And this doesn't come out of the blue. I'm not trying to say that I know Putin. I'm looking at his track record and prefer to build a model of the man out of his deeds than out of my suppositions. And there is one overriding supposition which makes me think that he will cut production by up to 20%, take the pain, and seek to strategize it by using it as a tool, economic tool of escalation. The reason he will do that is because he has already done so on gas. Gas paid for as much of the war as oil did any day. And it only went to Europe, and it could go nowhere else because there were no pipelines, a few piddling little ones to China in the east, but nothing to talk of. And yet, Putin was willing to rip up pipelines under the sea, and God knows what else, by the way, don't forget the cables. He was willing to cut production flowing through North Sea 1. He was willing to cut production flowing through the other pipelines, and to make sure that the amount of gas reaching Europe was now, as it is, an economic irrelevancy. If Putin was prepared to do that as a tool of escalation to split European and American solidarity, why would he not do the same now with oil, which is likely to be more painful than the gas, which has already been painful enough, but we've got out of the way of it by increasing our storage, cutting our use of it, and having a recession which will get us by this winter. So I think the portrait of the man, which does not hang blood dripping and ghoulish on my wall, speaks to cutting oil and not to trying to ship it. Now, let us say that David Roach is talking gobbledygook, which would not be anything new. Russia, under the scenario I've described, and simplifying the whole thing for minds small as my own, assuming that it does not want to cut production, will have to ship approximately 5.5 million barrels a day, of which 2.3 to 2.5 million barrels a day are going to be new barrels which have to go on boats, because they used to go to Europe, 70% of it on boats. So he needs new boats. Now let us think about that for a minute. Where would the new boats actually come from? Well, that is not easy. First of all, there are the Indian and the Chinese boats, which are approximately, and I look down here, not being a very boat person, though I do like kayaking. I look down here and I say, China and India together have 2.6 million barrels per day of tanker capacity. Russia has less than 1 million barrels per day capacity. And the dark market has got 240 vessels of varying sizes, ranging from the bathtub to the dirty little tankers we used to see along our coasts, and some decent vessels. But in general, nearly 80% of them are aged nearly 20 years or older. It's a very inefficient way to ship oil. Now, why do I call them dark market or dark tankers, dark ships, like the Vliegende Hollander? I call them that because they're owned by rather dodgy people who are going to try and avoid the shipping laws, they're going to try and avoid the price caps, and they're going to try and put money in their own pockets as they ship this stuff illegally around the world to destinations which are as doubtful as themselves. But they're not going to be able to do much of a job. And the reason is their capacity is 3.7 million barrels a day. But realistically, it stands at about 10% of that figure, so 0.37. And the reason it's so low is because most of these ships go out with oil to their destination and come back with ballast, which means half of their distance is not earning any money. It also is to do with the fact that they have to transship in the middle of the ocean to disguise their identities, that they have been busy with Venezuela and so on, and that leads to them being quite easily identifiable. And that, of course, the best and most professional sailors don't actually end up in these things. So if you add all that up together, you need 5.5 million barrels to be leaving Russia by ship now. You've got 1 million Russian. You've got 2.6 Chinese, and Indian is 3.6. And you have got a 0.4, 0.5 of dark ships. So as you can see, you are a long, long way short of the amount of capacity that would be needed to ship the oil which Russia currently ships around the world and to Europe. And therefore that oil would not get shipped, and therefore the supply side of the world oil market would be damaged. And that therefore, as the demand side would be intact, more or less, excluding the effects of the European recession and demand compression, the demand side would be pretty intact and the prices would have to go up. You are, in fact, to put it in the simplest way, you need 5.5 million barrels a day of seaborne capacity. And as far as I can see, you've got 4. So you're short 1.5 million barrels a day. Now, let us assume that that 1.5 million barrels a day you were short were cut off Russian production. That would be 15% at a bad time when things which are cut off freeze and can't be started up again. It can be styled up as strategic escalation, but it is loss. And it is turmoil. It is turmoil, of course, for the West, particularly for countries in Europe, again, and it is turmoil for the whole world. Now, where we go from this is something like a 50% increase in LPG, which can comfortably be bought by Europe 3-5 years down the road. And this is just makes Russia another Kim Jong-il irrelevancy, making a bloody nuisance of himself on the edge of the civilized world. But we aren't there yet. And I wanted to tell you what I think Putin's next escalation will be. Be careful. Stock up, I'm afraid to have to tell you, on all those horrible fossil fuels that probably keep you warm in the winter. And keep the lights off as much as possible, because then you lose less of them and it will give us all marginal hope.